Hey, what's happening? This is Dwelle, the original Motor Citizen. I'm cooling right here on Detroit JazzStage, so make sure you keep it locked. Enjoy the music, enjoy the sounds, enjoy the feeling. Peace and love, y'all.
Hello and welcome to Detroit Jazz Stage. I'm Rodney Reeves.
And I'm Jim Gallert. This month we feature pianist educator Rick Roe, a member of the Michigan State University Professors of Jazz and a winner of the Great American Jazz Piano Competition.
We'll check out cuts from several of Rick's trio sets, as well as unreleased material from the Professors of Jazz. That's this month on Detroit Jazz Stage.
So Rick Roe, welcome to Detroit Jazz Stage, and thank you very much for dropping by our table here to chat with us for a few minutes. You seem to have more of a bent for Monk's music than many players do. I mean, you know, like Kenny Cox loves the music of Monk, but he doesn't play it all that often, you know. But you seem to feature it fairly regularly in your program. Did Monk? Was his impact primarily as a composer or as a pianist?
Actually, when I first heard him playing piano, I didn't understand how he got on recordings based on the way it sounded to me at that time, because my mindset was of more of a technical, what seemed like a technical proficiency, and you know, the more classically trained and blues-oriented like Oscar and stuff. So it took me a little bit to understand what was going on with Thelonious Monk, in my own impression, of course.
Mm-hmm. Was there somebody that took you by the shoulder and shook you a little bit and said, "You got to listen to this stuff"?
There actually was a friend of mine who wasn't a player, but he was a music lover, and he shares the same name as a great jazz pianist, John Lewis.
Oh, okay.
And he really made me double take with Monk and really pay attention, and gave me that Monk and Train record to check out, and I was like floored, because I already had been attracted to John Coltrane, and when you hear the language that you might understand better over the great compositions and logic in Monk's music, let alone, you know, the illogic that's quite witty and tasteful and hilarious in a lot of cases too. That made it easier to understand than some of the things I had heard when I was younger.
Sure.
So you're saying there's a certain level of maturity required perhaps to understand Monk, because his compositions are so strong, his melodies are so strong. It seems like no matter who you hear play Monk, it still, to some degree, it sounds like Monk.
Mm-hmm.
If they're playing one of Monk's compositions, I mean, it seems, I don't know if it's built in, maybe there's a technical description for it, but it seems like if you play those melodies, to some degree it sounds like Monk, whereas you can get 50 guys playing I Got Rhythm, and it'll sound like 50 different guys. But Around Midnight, or Straight No Chaser, even just the blues, you know, I mean, it still sounds to some degree like Monk.
Yeah, that says a lot, because obviously those melodies, they just have a character to them that makes them out of the norm, and yet just as strong as maybe what would be more expected to the ear. You know,
Right.
I guess it depends on what tune you're talking about too, because some of them have an incredible sense of logic to them, too, and simplicity. But others are as cool as what 20th century music has to offer, and a lot hipper too.
Oh, yeah.
No offense.
Right.
Now, I notice that many of your CDs, or most of your CDs, are with smaller groups. I mean, specifically a trio. Is that your preferred size group, or do you like bigger groups? Or
I do like bigger groups, and hopefully you're going to hear some of a little taste of one of my compositions that the professors did record in that. Actually, that's got almost 4 horns. I think that's what we have.
almost 4 horns.
Almost. I'm trying to remember if they all play on my tune, because Wes Anderson and the Gardner brothers, Derek and Vincent, and Diego Rivera, who's one of the professors of jazz, are all on this recording that hasn't officially been released.
Well, why don't you give us the rest of the lineup, since you're doing this part of it?
Rodney Whitaker, our fearless leader, and Randy Gillespie on the drums, and I think that's it.
So you've got who is it? The Gardner.
The Gardner brothers. Vincent is a regular member of the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, and he was an artist in residence. I believe it was the year before this year. But Vincent Chandler has been also an artist in residence up at MSU, who's been helping with our trombone students. But Vincent is actually on this first recording.
Vincent
Gardner.
He's an amazing trombone
Yes,
player.
he is, and he's an arranger and composer as well.
Wow.
And quite good at it.
So, and his brother Derek, who
Derek's awesome.
he's got kind of he reminded me of just a little bit of Fats Navarro. He's got that incredible, round, ebullient, energetic sound.
And he has a grasp of the tradition, plus his own modern type of approach that encompasses. I mean, that's something I've kind of reveled at with the professors of jazz, that we all have pretty similar tastes in what's, if it has to be labeled, stylistic approaches and recordings, discography and repertoire and approach to the music. So.
And this is a band that recorded you brought us a couple cuts, did you? Rick?
I brought you one in particular, only because it's an original.
Okay. Tell us what it is that we have to listen to when we're listening to this tune, something that's really interesting to you, maybe compositionally, and we got to jump into this thing and hear it.
Okay, the title of it is B-Dop, and I'm just playing with bebop because that's another way of being able to sing the syllables. And it's a monkish type head, and it's a blues. It's in D flat.
Okay.
And it has some of the type of elements that a monk piece would have, with melodic content and intervals and the whole tone sound.
Very nice. Rick, I'm curious about your background playing. I knew you as a fully, developed player, but I didn't know the story of you before, your background, where you learned how to play and your inspiration to jazz.
Wow. I'd have to say that my mother played a big role in my exposure to jazz music, being that she's a vocalist and started out more classically in musical theater, but was very strongly drawn towards jazz and had a natural sense of improv, beautiful sound, and a love for the American songbook and jazz classics. And, hearing Charlie Parker being played in the house and Sarah Vaughan and Billie Holiday, it definitely influenced me. And my father's also a vocalist, a classical. He's actually a professor down at the University of Arizona in Tucson.
Oh, really?
Heads the opera department there.
So where did you grow up, though?
I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay.
I went to kindergarten in Ypsilanti, but we moved to Ann Arbor, and my mother taught in the public school system there, in the high school, community high school, the alternative arts school. But I was going to say before I went there, that's okay, I was going to backtrack to having started playing at 4 years old and getting formal kind of training. But when I turned 12, I was introduced to a teacher in the Ann Arbor area that actually at that time was teaching at the same high school that my mother was, and heading the jazz program at Community High before its current director, Michael Grace. This teacher's name was Bart Pollitt, and he was actually a theory and composition doctorate at U of M, but he was teaching jazz piano privately, and I learned a lot from him. And I had Lewis Smith, the great trumpeter, as a teacher for 7th and 8th grade. This was all happening at the same time, so that was a serious foundation and exposure to the music. Starting to get really focused on jazz. Cool.
But you didn't go to U of M, did you?
I did not. I actually went out to California to finish high school after 9th grade, because at that time my father was teaching at the University of Southern California. So I wanted to get a chance to, one, to get to live with him, and to finish high school and go into USC, basically because when your parents work at the university, you get free tuition. So sure. That was a big incentive.
When did you hear some live jazz or live music? I mean, what was the first big musical experience you had? I mean, in terms of hearing someone.
Wow, that's a great question, because I was able to hear a lot of the performances of my parents growing up and live situations, but I also, growing up in Ann Arbor, got to hear Oscar Peterson play at Hill and McCoy Tyner, and I saw McCoy Tyner play at the Earl in Ann Arbor too, down in that room. That was incredible. And Betty Carter, and I got to see a lot of live music, and when I was more like getting into junior high. And
so you were just a young teen when you were exposed to all this stuff.
Yes.
When did you start working? Playing gigs, when did you have your first gig? Do you remember?
Wow, that was actually, I remember accompanying my mother, and I was only I was in 9th grade. We played the WEMU competition. You know what I mean? And I was only, 15, 16, something like that. And
how about jazz? Your first jazz gig?
Well, That is hard to remember. I remember also doing jam sessions like at the Dell when Lewis Smith had the gig, and I got to go there and accompany him. But to have my first gig where I got paid was probably more like in high school, when I had some private gigs with some friends of mine that played, and some solo gigs too.
I noticed that you've recorded with some exceptionally strong bass players. I mean, we have many great bass players in and around the city, but certainly you've recorded with two of the stronger players, Paul Keller and Rodney Whitaker. And I was wondering, is there something in common between the two of them that you find, or Was it just chance that you ended up working with those guys, or how did that come about?
Well, they're both great bass players, and that's definitely what attracted me to them and wanting to work with them.
But I mean, they always strike me as sort of like an Oscar Pettiford or Charles Mingus, in that they both have very strong personalities on their instruments, whereas a lot of bass players, though they may be fine musicians, they take a more laid-back approach. They keep time, but I mean, these guys are more, I would say, more soloists, or more inclined towards soloing than a lot of bass players.
They're both great leaders and composers, and Paul does a whole lot of arranging, and Rodney does a whole lot of directing, and also, as you know, leading the program up at Michigan State. But that's definitely reflected in the powerful impact of his music as well.
So you think that they're composing and these other roles that they have definitely affect their playing?
Absolutely. I went to Europe with Paul Keller and the Paul Keller Orchestra back in 2000, and that was really a great experience. And Paul's a great leader and a great player too. But all that other part, the part of the composition and the arranging definitely makes them greater musicians than perhaps those that don't do that.
How about drummers? I mean, do you look for a drummer that's maybe just an excellent timekeeper, or a drummer that's say on the same level, as strong a player as say Rodney or Paul Keller?
Absolutely. I'm trying to have drummers that play at a high level, but definitely connect strongly with those particular bass players too. That they have a great chemistry and connection rhythmically, and certainly the high musicianship of Karriem Riggins and Greg Hutchinson and Gerald Cleaver. I've been very fortunate and happy to be able to work with them.
You're listening to Detroit Jazz Stage.
I had heard it said more than a few times that if you're from Detroit and you're a piano player, that's almost all you need to say. And, we have that tradition with Tommy Flanagan and then, Kurt Lightsey and, Jerry Allen.
Barry Harris.
And even some newer people like Carlos McKinney. And,
yes.
How do you feel you fit into that whole lineage of great Detroit piano players? And how was that influence felt in your playing?
That's a real hard question to answer. I don't really think about that, except that I know I'm trying to be the best musician I can be and keep growing as a jazz pianist. And I'm certainly influenced by all the pianists you mentioned, including some you didn't, like Gary Shunk, who's fabulous, and Rob Pifo.
Sure.
Even Rob's main instrument is vibes.
Right.
I'm trying to continue to go after my own voice and my own compositional sense and arranging, but you also know that I'm an educator, and that definitely has taken a lot of my energy, but it has been a great source of inspiration and motivation for me to also feed the fire to keep moving forward with my own playing and in music.
I think, that's an interesting question, Rodney, because I think kind of what you're sort of asking him is almost something that I've always been curious about. Is there a Detroit piano style, a jazz piano style? I mean, if you look at the pantheon of piano players who have come out of Detroit or spent their formative years here, Hank Jones or Roland Hanna or Barry Harris or Tommy Flanagan or Bess Bonnier, is there a definitive Detroit sound, or is it like an approach or a type of a certain sensibility that one has if one is learned how to play piano in Detroit? Is there something in the water?
That's interesting. I think that's interesting because even the differences between the East Coast jazz and the West Coast jazz.
Exactly.
I think Detroit is definitely more influenced by the East Coast, bebop and that whole tradition. That because a lot of those cats were coming through here. I know you're very well aware of that, and I think that definitely has played a role in the whole influence of pianists through the generations here.
But there were other guys that influenced you, or
yes.
that influenced your musical thinking. Who were some of the other musicians?
I think it's some of those top names you hear about, right. Bill Evans, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, and some of the more modern cats past them. But then I must say I've gone back too, and not so much in terms of like just trying to emulate, but even the earlier pianists of Duke Ellington and Fats Waller. And I mean, I don't play lots of stride, but I love all of the tradition of the music. But certainly the more modern players really attracted me too. So, I mean, even being willing and daring to check out Cecil Taylor and some of the other cats, Andrew Hill and Horace Parlin. And hearing these cats early on, too, it knocks me out. Because, I mean, hearing him like on Dexter Gordon before some of his own later dates and stuff. But then Mulgrew Miller, Kenny Kirkland, these guys I found very inspiring. And even some of the younger cats today.
Right.
Yeah. Like whom? Like who?
Actually, I was just talking earlier about one that I've heard some of his stuff. Taylor Eichste, young guy in his mid-20s, is just really playing beautifully. But a little older than him, Danilo Perez would be another one who's been playing with Wayne Shorter. I think he's amazing. And Jerry Allen from Detroit.
The Detroiter.
So Rick, when you approach the piano, do you like playing acoustic or electric or?
Oh, I love acoustic. The Mothership, a beautiful brand. Yes, I mean I've been always interested. I love the Fender Rhodes and nice sound and synths and stuff like that. But my main focus is the piano and the depth that you can expression you can get from there still, to me, exceeds that of the electric instruments.
Well, what advice do you give students in your class if they say, well, I want to be I'd really like to be a jazz musician? That's perhaps a naive question or something. What do I have to do? Do you get students that actually that ask you that, or what do I have to do to be a jazz musician? Or
Sure. That's a completely reasonable question, and I don't think it's a totally simple answer, but if there was one, it would probably be that you have to start listening and acquiring some of the great classic recordings and use that as your key to start possibly being able to relate and feel this music. Because that's the start. You can be taught the theory of it, but if you can't start feeling it yourself, even as a listener, as someone that could move and groove to this music.
So what role do the blues play? Where does what's the blues? Are the blues relevant in music in the new millennia?
Absolutely. That's as Rodney Whitaker likes to say, that's one of our national anthems. It's the 12-bar blues is one of the most common forms, and it has so many memorable and hip melodies that have been written over that form, let alone variations on the harmonic, the changes to the tunes, and even the structure itself has been messed with a lot. It's obviously an intricate part of jazz music, even though it has its own genre as well.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that if you look at the earliest parts of the jazz piano tradition, say if we go back to Jelly Roll Morton, and where he incorporated what he always referred to as the Spanish tinge.
Yes.
And he had that Caribbean or Latin or whatever type of rhythm you may prefer to name it, but he would build that into his tunes. And he was a master of the blues.
Oh man, I recently dove into him too, because I had a young student who was only 13, who's a wicked little ragtime player, Adam Swanson, who was getting heavily into Jelly Roll. And here I am seeing James DePogny's recent book that's really awesome, which I had to get some of those Jelly Roll Morton piano rolls, the recordings that I know that were kind of re-engineered to sound, like they're in a hall on a grand. But those have all been quite inspiring, and all the different ways you just described all of that is so readily in his music, along with hearing him talk about some of it on some of those...
on the Library of Congress recordings.
Yes.
Was he... do you see similarities between his little world and the world which Monk created? In terms of uniqueness or strength of melodies or anything like that?
Well, interesting. I think I would be into studying more what possible influences he might have had on Duke Ellington too, because Duke is definitely easy to trace in Monk's playing.
I think he is the go-between.
I really do, and also having found out that Duke Ellington and Fats Waller and James P. Johnson, they would all be hanging, playing cars, smoking cigars, and Monk was the young one, but they had a piano there, and they would all take turns playing their version of like the same tune, and but Monk was like the runner boy for them, getting them cigarettes or whatever. But they would all, they all ended up being friends and respecting each other, I think, in the highest way.
Well, we talked about Jelly Roll and his Spanish tinge. There is a song that you recorded that we're going to be listening to tonight where you show us your Spanish tinge. What was it? What was the title of that tune?
Is it which one?
Something about the close to the equator.
Close to the equator.
Yeah, you're into wordplay. I see.
I am. I also have one on the Changeover called Zacatecas, which is in Mexico. It's the capital and a state in Mexico that I got to visit with Rodney Whitaker and Francisco Mora.
Oh, wow.
And who went with us on that? Dwayne, now I'm forgetting my man's the trumpet player's name from Detroit, and his brother plays trombone and keyboards.
Oh, Daryl Duncan.
Daryl Duncan and Albert
Oh,
Duncan.
yeah.
I meant to say Daryl. Yeah, Daryl Duncan. So we all went there, and that played a role, but I can say it's more from hearing the music coming from Latin influenced jazz.
Your montunos are great.
Oh, thank you.
They're very cool, very rhythmical.
Thanks, man.
Interesting. Again, even the voicings there, the voicings on your montunos are not what you normally hear. They're very hip.
Oh, thank you.
you do have a website. It's
roemusic.com.
ROE, not W for anyone listening.
Right.
So they can email you there, right?
They could.
It's been possibly even think about studying with you over at Michigan State.
That's very possible, yes. And they could also email me at roer@msu.edu.
I also wanted to we talked a little bit about the blues influence, and there's going to be a blues tune I believe we're going to be listening to this evening.
There's one on the newest release that I have as a duo with Rodney Whitaker from my most recent recording, Sphere, called Salt River Blues.
The thing that struck me about that is the one thing that I really love in jazz blues especially, is when you got a player that takes it so far back that it makes your heart feel like it's going to jump out. It's like being at the climatic scene of a scary movie. But when you're playing, back like that, it doesn't just. It's not an instant. It's forever. Like the whole tune, you're like, it's all, you know what I mean? That's the feeling I get when I hear that. But your feel is so cool and so laid back, and that tempo is so slow, but happening.
That means a lot to me.
Was
Thank
that
you.
a conscious thing?
I'd like to say that working with Rodney Whitaker, who I've known and been good friends with for about 20 years, definitely plays a role in helping create that feel,
that groove.
Yeah, I'd like to think that I can get something like that going with in a solo situation, but. These great musicians definitely play a role in helping me get to that feel.
Yeah, speaking of feel and different ways of playing, we were talking a little bit earlier, not on mic but off mic, about one of the earlier times that I saw you play. I took a mental note in the fact that you were playing on your solos. You dropped out your left hand, even though you have great voicings. You were working through some things, and you told me that some musicians were really bothered by that.
Yeah, that was one of the criticisms I used to get too. Is like, your right hand sounds great, but where's your left hand? When are you gonna be working that more? And I did even explain to some of them, just like I could say that, using any type of root-oriented voicings, or even root 7, which Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell are using up the kazoo, but especially Monk. Modern bass players don't always like that. You know what I mean?
Right, sure.
And at the same time, there's so many recordings where Red Garland and Herbie Hancock and even Bud are being very sparing in their left hand, because the intricacy of what's going on in their right hand is already like that of a horn player.
Sure.
Not that it couldn't have some kind of accompaniment, but it actually does take some serious focus and time to develop just those lines, by themselves. Although I can say that I also have students work on playing accompaniment at the same time. It's learning to play lines, and hopefully in the midst of that be able to latch onto a vocabulary that expresses more what they're trying to say than just being fed,
So what you were trying to just strengthen your lines and really get that stuff under control there, right?
Definitely, to be working that language and what I'm trying to say with the lines, not just in terms of what does this mean with the left hand, and what kind of role, or just playing in the cracks even. It's like that's something that I have more, I think, now going on, even though I could find myself feeling like, no, I'm just going to deal with the single line and go there, because it's also trying to get a sound and a feel, and it's not always about the more traditional or kind of expected approaches, which, by the way, I really like too. I like hearing a pause for the cause.
Sure.
But, as jazz musicians, especially into the bebop tradition, we try to learn to connect lines over changes as one of the vehicles to really know how to play over changes.
Yeah.
And then I think it becomes more meaningful, and you can have that become more like a conversation or speaking with pauses and accompaniment.
Right.
It sounds sometimes so analytical and theoretical. That's the only thing I don't like, but as a teacher, you try your best to be able to talk about it in a way that can describe what can happen in a spontaneous or an inspired type of situation.
Sure.
So where you've told us about these multiple CDs that you've got out, Rick. How can people get copies of them?
They're available at cdbaby.com. That's CD Baby is one word, and you can read about them and listen to samples and stuff, and very easy to order. And they're also available from North Country Distributors, Redwood, New York, the Cadence Magazine.
Yeah, Cadence Magazine, sure.
They're in the Cadence building there. Yeah, so all 5 of them, including Pop Culture, which I'm honored to be a part of as well, with our dear friend Mark Byerly.
And we mustn't forget, if you're interested in hearing more about Bob Culture, or Rick Roe, or Mark Byerly, check out our November podcast from last year. That was our first podcast, so you'll hear that it's quite raw, but we were trying to bring something to you, and we were able to present some great stuff, including a song that you wrote for your wife, and that was called what again? I can't recall.
Till I Get There.
Till I Get There. It had some great augmented chords. It's a beautiful song. Really a great ballad. I think people will enjoy it.
Thank you.
And your Rhodes playing. You spoke a little bit about how you enjoy playing on the electric piano, and that can be heard in that program. And a lot of people seem to really love that music. We've gotten
probably more reaction from that first show, honestly, than anything else.
Oh, that's awesome.
And interestingly enough, in England.
Oh, wow.
That's all the comments seem to be coming from the UK. So, not that you can't enjoy that, south of the border.
And that's all
north.
from the EP that
Right.
followed up our first acoustic recording.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
Well, Rick, we'd like to really thank you very, very much for dropping by our table here at Detroit Jazz Stage and spending some time with Rodney and myself. And we look forward to listening to more of your very modern music that is steeped in the jazz tradition. And it's also looking outwards to other things. And we hope that maybe when you get a couple more CDs under your belt, she'll be able to drop by one night between sets at our table here and have another chat with us.
Well, thank you, Jim and Rodney. It's a great pleasure. Thanks for letting me join you this evening.
It's our pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Rick Roe CDs are available at cdbaby.com. A link is also on our site. Many of the artists mentioned on this podcast have been featured on past episodes. Go to jazzstage.us for more information. Hi, I'm Rodney Reeves from JazzStage Productions. If you enjoy listening to Detroit Jazz Stage, we encourage you to leave your comments on iTunes. Doing so will help promote our show and keep us bringing quality shows to your iPod.
Detroit Jazz Stage is produced at Longview Sound in Metro Detroit for JazzStage Productions. Dean Sahutsky, executive producer. Mark Byerly is our sound engineer. I'm Jim Gallerts.
And I'm Rodney Reeves.